Hello, my name is Tyler, and welcome to Receive Them. I was diagnosed as autistic as a child, and in my walk with Christ, I have become burdened to help equip churches to minister to other people on the autism spectrum. This material that you are about to hear is birthed from that burden. This is the first of 4 sessions seeking to cultivate knowledge and wisdom so that churches are able to receive autistic individuals whom God may bring into their care, and to do so with Christ-like love and compassion. I found peace concerning my disability and Christianity. I found a sense of belonging as an autistic person in the local church. And now I want that for others on the spectrum. In these next few minutes, let me share a little of my heart and my hope for the autistic community. So let us begin with the Word of God. In John chapter 9, verses 1 through 3, Jesus is walking with his disciples, and they encounter a man who has been blind from birth. And the disciples ask, for what purpose was this man born blind? For whose sin was he born blind? What was the cause? Was it his father's sin? Was it his sin? And Jesus says, neither, but rather he was born blind so that the works of God would be made manifest through him. Now, the worldview that Jesus had was that there's something about God that we learn through disability. There's something about God that we learn through the blindness and the weakness. And commenting on that passage, John Piper makes this remark. And he says, if you want to be one of the most remarkable kinds of human beings on the planet, a Jesus kind, see people with disabilities, see them and move towards them, and God will show you what to say. And that is essentially what this material aims to do, is to help people see people with disabilities. Not just to see the disability, but to see the person who is made in God's image. And as we begin, let's consider the numbers. These are the current numbers concerning the prevalency of autism in the United States, courtesy of the CDC. As of 2025, it is estimated that 1 in 31 children will have an autism diagnosis by their 8th birthday, in comparison with 2000, when the estimate was 1 in 150. And all that really means is that autism is becoming more prevalent. It's something that's becoming more commonplace in our day-to-day lives. If you're a school teacher, there's a likelihood that you will have at least one autistic student in your class. If you're on a bus, you're likely to encounter statistically at least 1 or 2 on spectrum on the bus. And so it's becoming very common in the life that we live. So some more numbers. In addition to autism being more commonplace, it's also bearing with it certain challenges and struggles. And so 85% of autistic people are also unemployed. 9 in 10 autistic women report experiencing sexual assault. And nearly 7% of people in addiction treatment centers are diagnosed as autistic. Supplementally, autistic Americans are 4 times more likely to experience depression, and young people on the spectrum have twice the risk of suicide compared with neurotypical people in the same age group. And all that to say that autistic people have baggage, they have trauma, they have very real personal things that they're working through. This is a demographic that needs the hope of the gospel. And this is a demographic that has largely been unreached. And there is a tantamount need for us to minister to them. And the reality is that autistic people, both children and adults, are bound to walk through the doors of our churches sooner or later. In fact, they may already be among us. And that is where I come in. I was diagnosed as autistic when I was 6 years old. This is something I've grown up with, and this is something I continue to grow with. And when you're diagnosed as early as I was, it sticks with you. I don't really remember a time before the word autism. That's something I've known most of my life, essentially. This is something I've been studying for myself for 20 years. What is autism? What is this thing? And when I was 14 years old, that kind of kicked up a notch because I was doing some extracurricular activities at school, and I found out pretty quickly that I didn't think like other people. It's one of the things you learn when you argue with other 14-year-olds is you realize, okay, we are not the same. And so when I was 14 years old, I became aware that I was cognitively different from my peers. It's also the same year that I became a Christian. I became a believer in the Christian faith. And those two have always intersected. That my autism story and my Jesus story have always been overlapping. And such is the case with Receive Them. I'm not an expert, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist or anything like that, but this is the result of that convergence of my autism story and my Jesus story. This is the product of me learning about autism from the time I was 6, but also what I've learned experientially from walking with God through my autism. And maybe I can provide a little bit of understanding, a little bit of hope regarding autism in your life. But it also is worth saying that autism is a spectrum. And so what has worked for me is not necessarily applicable to every person on the spectrum. And so if we're going to minister to autistic people, we have to recognize that if you've met one person on the spectrum, you've met one person on that spectrum. And so we have to have a principled view. These are what the autistic struggles can be, so that we have the wisdom to meet them where they are. And so we have to fan out a little bit and go, what is autism? And one way we might think about it is in this picture right here. Believe it or not a single one of these was generated with AI. These are all actual puzzles that an actual person put together, kind of. There was a gentleman in Washington that found out that a certain puzzle company would use the same combination of piece shapes and just put a differing design over the top. And so with a little bit of patience and a lot of free time, courtesy of a global pandemic, he was able to make these kind of unexpected shapes and designs here. My personal favorite is the horse train. But essentially, all the pieces are there, it's just different. And that's one way we might think about what autism is that it's a series of specific differences in the way those pieces fit together. That all the pieces are there in the brain, it's just different. And so autism is a collection of specific differences in that layout. And those differences affect how we interpret our environment, how we respond to stressful situations, and even how we interact with other people. And autistic people experience the world around them in a way that we may say is, neurologically atypical. And what that essentially means is that the brain is made up of parts. And each part has a specific function, has a specific job. And for the brain to do more complicated things, like, say, talking, it requires differing parts to communicate with each other. And the way God's designed that to work is through having a bridge between two parts. So if you're going to speak, for example, that requires the part of your brain that handles movement to be in communication with the part of your brain that formulates the words. And God's designed the brain to do that through having a bridge between those two sections. In the way the autistic brain is mapped, on average, we find that an autistic brain has 2 to 3 times as many of those bridges as we would expect. And what that means is there's bigger network, there's more traffic, and there's more noise. And so autism is not just behavior, it's not psychology, it's biology. There's something objectively different in the brain in the way it's constructed. And that's an important distinction because, as was said of Vincent van Gogh's mother in this biography, incomprehension gave way to impatience, and impatience to shame, and shame to anger. And that was in reference to Van Gogh's mother, as it said in a biography, because his mother was very much the epitome of this saying. She was very much impatient with him, and that impatience bred shame and anger. And historians looking back now believe that Vincent van Gogh was actually autistic, which gives some clarity to some of the, erratic behaviors that we all know about Van Gogh. Is that he was an autistic person struggling to function in that Dutch society in the 1800s. And this is a picture of what we don't want, is we don't want incomprehension that leads to suffering, is we want knowledge that leads to wisdom that breeds love. And in that, we have to acknowledge what autism is not. It's not bad parenting. It's not a lack of parenting. It's not a social media trend, and it's not a guarantee that your child will be a genius. While the movies tend to give us stories about autistic people who have this remarkable ability for math or science or something like that, like The Good Doctor and The Rain Man, that oftentimes some of us like those stories, the idea of an autistic person that does incredible things, but that's not every person on the spectrum. I'm not good at math. I tapped out at about a 6th grade level in math, and I got C's all through high school in math. I couldn't do algebra. I can't do algebra. That's not my story, is that there's that genius ability to do math or science or something. And oftentimes these movies and the representations from the media give us a view of autism that is fictitious. We're not all the Good Doctor, we're not all the Rain Man. And when we get into more church-centered views of what autism is that are inaccurate, there are pastors in this country who have said from their pulpits that it's demonic, that it's the result of demonic oppression, and therefore autistic people don't need compassion or love, they need exorcism, they need deliverance. And that is a view that I will come out right here and say is not of God. That is not consistent with the Word of God, the character of God, or the heart of God. That is not even remotely close. And I would cite John 9 as an example of that. But in addition to it not being a lack of faith, autism is not contagious. It's not a disease. But most importantly, it is not a reason to despair. That an autism diagnosis does not mean that hope dies. And that's something that we could do with a reminder of in the Christian church. That if somebody is diagnosed as autistic, that does not mean that there is a lack of hope now. It just means that the journey is a little bit different. But if autism is being identified more commonly now, how are we identifying it? What are we looking for? And the way we identify autism is a little different now than it was 20 years ago. And so in 2013, the diagnostic methodology adopted a 3-tiered approach. And so you have levels of needs. There's level 1, level 2, and level 3. 1 being low support needs and 3 being high support needs. For reference sake, I'm considered a 1. I'm considered low support needs, but this is what replaced words like Asperger's and high functioning, because we found that with Asperger's and high functioning, it bred comparison, and it was also a spectrum. And so you had a spectrum within a spectrum within a spectrum, and it didn't really bring clarity to what the individual needed. And so having this breakdown means that autism in the individual is characterized more by what they need rather than what they do. So it's not just behavior, but it's what does the person need in their disability. And as far as the traits that we're associating those needs with, what are the traits of autism? That's going to be 3 main groups: is social differences, sensory differences, and fixations and routines. And with social differences, that refers to just the differing way that we approach interacting with people. Is oftentimes we have difficulty making eye contact or identifying nonverbal cues like facial expressions or body language. Additionally, it also means a difficulty reciprocating those things, so being able to express those things to other people. Like, I'm not particularly expressive in my face, and in a right setting, that can unintentionally communicate to somebody that I am disinterested in what they're saying. And that could be far from the truth, that I'm actually interested in what they're saying. I'm just not really sure how to show. But one thing that a lot of autistic people can relate to is in the social setting is feeling as if everyone else has some kind of manual or rule book for how to interact that we just didn't get. And so it feels like everybody has this secret knowledge of how to communicate that we just didn't get for some reason. And so we truly desire to connect with people, we just aren't sure how. Or the way that we desire to connect with people is a little bit different. And that's where it becomes a little bit isolating sometimes, because the way other people connect is not necessarily natural to us. And moving on from social differences, you have sensory differences, which is differing kinds of sensitivities to the senses. You have hypersensitivity, hyposensitivity, and what we might consider undersensitivity. And hypersensitivity is where things that are already loud to most people are just that much louder. That's what I deal with, is that things like music at a concert is way louder to me than it is to other people, and oftentimes it brings a pain response. But other people on the spectrum may experience what we call hyposensitivity, where things that most people don't consider too loud, like the squeaking of a door hinge, to this individual might be way up here. It might be more of a deafening sound. And that's hyposensitivity. And the third kind being just an undersensitivity, maybe even to the extreme of not being able to feel pain. That's not something I have, but there are people that definitely struggle with that, and that leads to some underlying issues when you're more likely to get injured because you don't have that warning system from the brain telling you if something hurts or you're being burned. But in addition to that, having sensory differences in the way you process information from your senses, that also looks like being clumsy, like having a difficulty identifying where your body is in space or where other things are in space. And it also could look like having a difficulty telling the signals from your body, things like when you're hungry or when you're thirsty or when something hurts. And lastly, you have fixations and routines. Oftentimes, autistic people have an inflexible desire for predictability and sameness. We're very eager to keep a routine and to do the same thing day after day. That also can look like insistent rule following, but even just outside of what we do to more what we're interested in, is we often have a high passion for specific areas of interest, and we can focus on those things for a very long time, sometimes to the extent that we forget to do other things. And all of this can be illustrated as looking something like this. Is that the picture on the left is what we would consider the neurologically typical brain. This is how neurotypical people would function to some degree. Some more than others, of course, but essentially you have a brain, or you have a battery, which is your brain, and that's dumping that power in a manner where it's divided between multiple tasks. But on the right, that's what my brain does, is it takes that battery and it dumps all available power into one thing. And it doesn't move on to the next thing until it clears the first. And this is essentially the why behind the traits that we consider autistic. Is why do I have a difficulty with making eye contact? Well, because my brain is uniquely wired to process on one thing. And so I'm missing the eye contact, or I'm missing the facial expressions, because I'm so dialed into hearing your words and understanding your words. Or why am I so dug in on a routine? Well, because my brain is so invested in one thing that it defaults to routine. And this idea is called monotropism, which gives us a systematic way of understanding not just what the autism traits are, but what the traits are doing in the mind, so that we have that better principled understanding that breeds wisdom and love. And in conclusion, three things. Autistic people are made in the image of God. That just as David said that he was knit together in his mother's womb by God, that in the utter darkness of the womb God knew him, so can the autistic person say these things. That autistic people are also made in God's image. Number two, in the hands of God, suffering, even autistic suffering, is never wasted. There are times where autistic people may say that they suffer. It gets hard. Autism is heavy sometimes. Some people may even look at their autism and say it's a burden. And that is something that the church can be a good thing for autism and autistic people, because we truly believe in bearing one another's burdens. That while we may not be able to fix all of the problems, that doesn't mean you have to deal with these problems alone. You don't have to walk this road by yourself. And what the church aims to be, and what the church needs to be for the autistic person, is a place where we can walk this road together, knowing that in the hands of God, not even suffering is wasted, but there is a purpose in your autism. There's a purpose why you are in this room today with us. And number three, the church is and always has been edified by differences. The way God has designed the church to be, designed it to function, is that the church is built up by having different people in it. And we are stronger together. We are better together. The church has always been edified by a body that is diverse. And unfortunately, that hasn't always been everybody's story. For many autistic people, the church has brought other problems. And that's something that I desire to do something about, to create dialogue that leads to change, that leads to better understanding and equips the church to love. And so I've put together this survey where you can anonymously give a voice to what you desire from the local church, what your needs are that you feel have been unmet by the church or by churches in general, and what you would like churches to understand about autism and autistic people. And this isn't so that I can air your dirty laundry or write a diary entry about all this, but this is so that I have a window into understanding what kind of resources I can attempt to create that will create change, how best I can contribute to the conversation of finding solutions so that we have one people, one body, so that autistic people feel like they belong in the church. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me today. This is, as I said, this is the first of 4 sessions on this material that I've called Receive Them. If that is something you would like to hear more about, feel free to drop a comment, send me a message, or however you would like to get in contact, and we can dialogue. There's also a YouTube channel where I will be putting out some other content. You can find all of that at www.receivethem.com. Thank you so much for your time. God bless.